Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this next in the series of Access KS&A's members-only webinars. In this case, this webinar on special education and disability advocacy is being presented by Stephanie James. Stephanie has her JD and is a professional advocate and also the mom of a young woman with disabilities. She actually acquired her law degree in large part because the challenges she faced in advocating for her daughter made a law degree an essential component of the tools that she needed. So Stephanie's here to share her advocacy experiences in this arena and help provide some guidance to parents who are struggling with school systems and other support services, and try to provide you with the tools you need to successfully advocate on behalf of your child. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Stephanie, and because of a feedback issue, I will be turning off my microphone, but I do want to point out that on this page we have added several things. One is the printable handout for this webinar. The second is Stephanie has a social media presence. She's on Twitter. She has a Facebook profile. She has a Facebook page for her business, and she has a LinkedIn account. And so you can connect with Stephanie in any number of ways, and I'll just encourage you to go back here to this page. As a member, you'll be able to see this page at will and find these resources. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie and let her begin the presentation. And putting up her PowerPoint, opening the microphone, and closing mine.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here. My name is Stephanie James, and I am a special education advocate and consultant with Special Education and Disability Advocacy, LLC. I advocate for students in Colorado as well as neighboring states and can provide consultation services nationwide. I attended law school at the University of Denver College of Law because I wanted to learn the law better than the school district where my autistic daughter was attending. I graduated from DU Law in 2004 with my Juris Doctorate and decided to become a professional special education advocate for other children as well, instead of practicing law as an attorney. I began my advocacy practice in July of 2005 and have been advocating for students with disabilities since. All of my contact information is on the first slide of this webinar, as well as the handout available through this webinar. I speak about advocacy sooner, not later, because sometimes parents delay pursuing and accessing the appropriate special education services for their child in the hope that the school will do the right thing. Let's go to the first slide, Jim. One moment, please. I speak about advocacy sooner, not later, because sometimes parents delay pursuing and accessing the appropriate special education services for their child in the hope that the school will do the right thing, or the school delays or denies a student's special education services. It is important to recognize that school districts have an obligation to evaluate a child that is suspected of having disabilities, whether you suspect it or they do. Sometimes parents have come to me when their child is older, in the latter grades of elementary school, middle school, or even high school. The earlier the better, but it is better later than never to act and to acquire what the Special Education Law, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, calls an, quote, appropriate education so the child may receive educational benefit. After your child has been evaluated and qualifies for receiving special education services, then we start to work on the IEP, the Individual Education Plan. I work with you and the other members of your child's education team for your child's education rights under the law. I remind parents and school districts that IDEA talks about parents as valuable IEP team members. If your child already has an IEP, but you, the parent, are not satisfied with the services being provided, want more appropriate goals and objectives, and or your child is not making reasonable progress in school, despite what their report card may show, then I advocate for more appropriate services, better teacher training based on your child's individual needs, additional evaluations to assess individual needs that may be addressed at school, accommodations and modifications that are needed for your child to access the curriculum and to be able to receive an appropriate education with their peers. Two very important special education acronyms among many are FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education, and LRE, Least Restrictive Environment. Through my tutelage and advocacy, parents become aware how to utilize these two acronyms to provide educational benefit for their child from their school. If a student is not receiving special education services based on their individual needs and learning style, then they are not receiving FAPE. And if they are not receiving those services to the appropriate maximum extent among their peers who are not disabled, then they are not receiving an education in the least restrictive environment. Many students receiving special education services have something called executive functioning skills issues or deficits. What does executive functioning mean? It involves the processes of planning, organizing, time management, working memory, and metacognition. If a student has problems with these skills, then most likely they are experiencing difficulties with their daily life, both at home and at school. Without these functional adaptive skills, it can be difficult for a child to get ready for school in the morning, function at school with assignments, and at home with homework. In this area, my advocacy is based on parents and teachers' observations and a functional behavioral analysis or evaluation. I advocate to identify the areas of suspected disability and related educational concerns, helping teachers and service providers, such as occupational and speech-language therapists, understand the student's individual needs, learning style, and strengths. A very good tool that I encourage parents and schools to utilize to help understand and work with students who are struggling in the classroom is called collaborative problem solving. This is an evidence-based approach to understanding and helping children with learning disabilities created by Harvard psychologist Dr. Ross Greene. This approach assesses lagging skills, such as difficulties with handling transitions, doing things in a logical sequence, poor sense of time, difficulty maintaining focus, difficulty managing emotional response to frustration. This tool also assesses unsolved problems at home and at school, like completing morning routine, cleaning their room, completing household chores, shifting from one task to another, getting started on or completing class assignments, specific academic tasks, etc. They have difficulty mastering the required skills to handle social, behavioral, and emotional challenges in life. This tool challenges those working with children displaying these issues to not see them as not motivated, manipulative, limit testing, or seeking attention, but rather to understand that consequences do not teach these children the thinking skills they lack or how to solve problems. Collaborative problem solving is also about being proactive. This is about knowing beforehand, based on prior experience, when the student needs help, to help kids better manage a problem and apply the learning to sort out other problems and prevent problems from occurring in the first place. This all requires a team approach, and this is what I work on building with students, educators, service providers, and parents. There are special education laws and civil rights laws that are applicable to your child at school if they have a disability. These are the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. In a broader context, your child has a right to an education under the Civil Rights Act. It is also beneficial to become familiar with your state's Department of Education website to understand the state regulations under IDEA. IDEA requires public schools to make available to all eligible children with disabilities a free appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment appropriate to their individual needs. IDEA requires public school systems to develop appropriate IEPs for each child. Specific special education and related services are outlined in every IEP to reflect the student's needs. Also, early intervention services are available under IDEA for children from birth to age 3 with developmental delays or diagnosed disabilities. Each state has an early intervention program, sometimes called Child Find, that evaluates infants or toddlers in 5 major areas of development to see if they meet their state definition of delay or disability and is eligible for EI services. The 5 developmental areas are cognitive development, physical development, including vision and hearing, communication development, social or emotional development, and adaptive development. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act requires school districts to provide FAPE to each qualified student with a disability that consists of the provision of regular or special education and related services designed to meet the student's individual educational needs as adequately as the needs of non-disabled students are met. Eligible students are identified as having a history of or having physical or mental impairments that substantially limits one or more major life activities such as caring for oneself, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing. Students who are receiving special education services under IDEA are also qualified under 504. The Americans with Disabilities Act, under Title II, requires school systems to make accommodations and modifications to address the needs of students with disabilities. This means changing the way things are usually done in order to take into account a child's disability-related needs, such as modifying rules, policies, or practices, removing architectural or communication barriers, or providing aids, services, or assistive technology. There are 13 categories or labels of disability under IDEA. They are autism, deaf-blindness, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual/cognitive disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disabilities, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment including blindness. In Colorado, for example, specific learning disability is identified or defined as a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. Again, in Colorado, most likely similar to other states, Intellectual/cognitive disability is defined as a child with an intellectual disability shall have reduced general intellectual functioning existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior and manifested during the development period, which prevents the child from receiving reasonable educational benefit from general education. There are other examples that parents can look at with their special education advocate to help identify the educational label their child needs to have to receive special education services under IDEA. I wanted to talk about initial evaluations for suspected disabilities, but please recognize that your child can be re-evaluated in later years, sometimes 1 or 2 years after the initial evaluations, using the same or similar evaluations. It is important to understand that your child's school district has a legal responsibility under special education laws to evaluate your child for any suspected disabilities. The initial evaluation should always include a cognitive evaluation that includes educational and intellectual achievement tests, psychological assessments regarding social, emotional, and behavioral functioning, gross and fine motor evaluations, occupational evaluations, and speech-language evaluations. Some examples of assessments for intelligence may include the Wechsler Scales of Intelligence, the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Test Scale, Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, Comprehensive Test of Nonverbal Intelligence, Woodcock-Johnson Tests of Cognitive Abilities, Peabody Individual Achievement Test. Some reading assessments may include Gray Oral Reading Test, Woodcock Reading Mastery Test, Test of Reading Comprehension. Written language assessments may include Test of Written Language. Spelling may include Test of Written Spelling. Mathematics assessments may include Key Math Diagnostic Arithmetic Test. Some examples of assessments for behavior may include Connors Parent and Teacher Rating Scales, Vinland Adaptive Behavior Scale, Adaptive Behavior Evaluation Scale. There are assessments for auditory and visual processing, sensory processing, speech-language, occupational, and physical therapy. Always review and discuss any potential evaluations recommended by the school district prior to authorizing them to evaluate your child. It is important to remember that if a school district does not evaluate your child with what you determine is a comprehensive evaluation, then you may seek, under IDEA, an evaluation outside of the school district, what IDEA calls an Independent Educational Evaluation, or an IEE. Everything I have covered in this presentation ties into writing effective, data-driven IEP goals and objectives. So many times I review IEPs that were written prior to my advocating that have ineffective goals and objectives. Oftentimes I meet with the educational team and parents, and the school members are rote-driven about what they have already written for the student or have written for other students that they may believe is applicable to the student for whom I am advocating, following an IEP format that is not individualized per the individual student's educational needs. As with the other areas I have mentioned in this presentation, this is an area of a student's educational services in special education that needs to be finely tuned. We look at the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. We review the state's academic content standards, bearing in mind the new Common Core standards currently for math and English language, writing, and reading for what students should know and be able to do. Always ask the 6 questions at IEP meetings: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who is delivering the services, and what are their professional qualifications and training regarding your child's disability? What is being delivered regarding content and accessibility? When will these services be delivered? How soon? What day or days of the week? What time of the day? Why are the services being delivered in the manner stated? And how will the services be delivered? Of course, there are more applications to each question. Don't leave an IEP meeting until your questions have been answered to your satisfaction. IEP goals and objectives need to be easily understandable to you and to anyone reading the IEP now and in the future. Making sure that everyone who works with your child reads and understands their IEP is invaluable. All the goals and objectives need to be measurable by objective measurements, not subjectively. Be attainable so that they are not too far out in the future, but rather reasonably achievable in a time frame of a few weeks or at most a month and a half, and realistic, applicable to your child. And finally, transition goals can be discussed as soon as when your child is 14 years old, usually written at age 15 as part of a transition IEP. IDEA requires transition services to be results-oriented to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities. Please feel free to ask me any questions now. Thank you.
Muted.
I don't see questions posted other than one trying to find the printout, and I've answered that. Now I see that Carolyn has asked, what is metacognition?
Unmuted. Muted.
Means the ability. Metacognition means the ability to look at yourself and assess your own performance, to understand how you are relating to the environment within which you are and how others are relating to you.
Muted.
Other questions? I can also open up microphones individually to allow dialogue. Carolyn, would you be interested in a follow-up question? I know you do not have a microphone. Okay, seeing no questions, I'm going to dialogue a bit with Stephanie because some questions came to mind. I do see another one that's just shown up, however, and that is, thank you. Our daughter is a sophomore. She is taking a reduced schedule and doing very well, but we are wondering how to plan for transition.
Unmuted.
So may I ask, how old is your child at this time?
Muted.
Since she's typing, it's going to take a moment. She is a sophomore. She's 16 years old. And if you give me a moment, I'll...
Unmuted.
All right, you definitely need to approach the school district and remind them that they need to start writing a transition IEP about what services are presently looking like and how you can make those services apply to post-graduation. It's important to involve your daughter, if possible, in self-advocacy and get her to let you know or come to the IEP meeting regarding what she wants to do possibly after high school, and then apply that request to how to set up the transition IEP and accessing some of those services prior to graduation, such as looking at appropriate job skills she can be learning at school, even possibly looking at volunteer jobs in the community, or if she is now 16, going out and trying to find jobs that she can start working at minimally when she's not in school.
Thanks, Stephanie. This is Mina. I would, So our daughter is doing very well in school thanks to the reduced schedule because she's really into science and math. So we're actually looking at having her go into college, probably, I don't know, animal biology or something. But she does need, it's a reduction of schedule and to handle the social things that go on at school. And so we've been very happy with the school and how they've handled most of the things that have come up. But we want to make sure that we've paved the road. I see that you said the IDEA goes until age 21. Will a charter school be able to keep her longer while she's still gaining credits? Since she would normally be graduating like 18 or something.
Well, once she graduates, then she no longer qualifies for services under IDEA. Sometimes parents delay that graduation until age 21, but sometimes that's harder on the child who may be ready to go on to college prior to age 21. So it's pretty much your child's decision as well as how you want to support her.
As long as she's still earning the credits there, they could do it. If she chose to stay a semester or two more, it would be okay. Because right now, she's ending freshman year only half a credit behind.
Okay.
But she could feasibly be a few more because we've already requested the reduced schedule for next year.
Right. She can stay there and delay her graduation until age 21, and so they can work with her.
Okay, that's wonderful because they allow her to also do dual credits with a community college, but it keeps her in a safe environment where she knows the staff. So that will be a nice option to be able to offer to her.
Right, good.
So who do you have on your team? Sorry, Stephanie.
Muted.
Carrie, if you can hear me, I can open your microphone and you can ask your question. I will watch for you to be available. And okay, Carrie does not have a microphone. So Carrie's question is, do you have advice for getting a public school system to pay for private placement in a school that specializes in learning disabilities?
Unmuted.
If you have the evidence that the school district she is currently in is not providing the appropriate services based on her needs, and you have sought evaluations within the school district and possibly gone outside of the school district for an independent educational evaluation, it's going to require a lot of records, and then possibly your personally going out into the community and finding that school district or that private school that may have offered to enroll your child there and demonstrate to your school district what they can provide based on your child's needs and what her current school district cannot provide, then yes, you can proceed to enroll her in the private school. But you must always make sure that everything is in writing and that you have made her present school district aware that you are seeking this private school education.
Okay, I'm going to just pick up on Stephanie's microphone, so let me get this next question.
Muted.
Carolyn asks, my son is at college and applies for certain special groups and never gets chosen. He does not tell us of his disability, and would it benefit him to say that he is or is not disabled Would this also apply to getting a job? And then Carolyn has a follow-up to that. And let me switch mics.
Unmuted.
Yes, I think it would benefit him if he is comfortable letting other people know about his disability and how it may impact his education and his social skills. The school and anybody that he may associate with in the community, such as businesses or other organizations, are not supposed to discriminate against him based on his disability, but it all depends on how comfortable he is sharing the disability. But lots of times making other people aware and helping them learn about any accommodations or modifications not only can benefit him, but benefits them in recognizing that he is a valuable member of their community.
Carolyn follows up with the interesting points of the discussion and mentions that her son, even with an IEP and in a supported school, was not allowed to get extra time for SAT and other exams of that type. Can you comment on that?
Yes, he can most definitely get extra time and some help on this type of exam. It needs to be qualified, and it sounds like it is in his IEP, what these accommodations and modifications may be. And then they just need to let the distributor of the examination and whoever is providing the examination what he's going to need beforehand and why. And then utilize this IEP as a valuable tool to help them understand this need.
So Carrie is following up on her question about support for private school placement. And she asked, can this be handled in mediation, or is some other due process necessary?
Well, we always want to look to mediation first. And then, if necessary, go on in administrative law, what we call administrative law, and filing a state complaint. And sometimes this can be done solely by the parents themselves. Sometimes a parent wants to use a special education advocate because there is a lot of paperwork involved in that as far as getting the required records ready to present. But then if you feel that you still are not getting what you need for your child, then you can go to due process. And for due process, I really recommend that you hire an attorney who specializes in special education.
Okay, well, I'm watching for more incoming questions. What I'd like to do is put Stephanie on the spot a little bit with some of my own. And if you could elaborate a bit on the particular label, other health impaired, because often that's one of the higher leverage tools that our folks have to use.
Other health impaired sometimes can be seen as not noticeable to the general population and how it may affect the student's learning. Lots of times the school district will want to see a medical doctor's documentation of exactly what this means and how it's affecting the student's ability to access an appropriate education. Sometimes other health impaired can be more visible to the general population. And then the school district is more readily wanting to do those evaluations that I mentioned at the beginning. But sometimes we have to make the school district aware of what outside evaluators or doctors or therapists have been able to diagnose and bring that to their attention. So I'm hoping that answers your question.
So following up on that, you used the term label, and can you maybe go back to some of those labels and explain why attaching this label is so important?
Well, the 13 categories that I listed, they're very important. They are what will qualify your child for advocacy. Excuse me. Let's see, which one is it? Let me look for the slide here. Okay, here we go. Okay. The 13 categories are the labels of disabilities under IDEA, and these will help your child access the appropriate education they need under IDEA. This is a beginning step to getting your child the appropriate services, and you can go to your state's Department of Education and look more thoroughly how they define each of these labels. But under these educational labels, you can be pretty broad in seeking the appropriate services that you know that your child needs. But this educational label is very important to get the educational team, that also includes you, the parents, to understand that your child does have a disability and is qualified to receive special education services. Sometimes these labels, we have a primary label, and then sometimes under that primary label, states will allow what is called a secondary label, and that will help define even more your child's needs. I also want to emphasize that along with these needs, we also want to recognize your child's strengths too. Sometimes the strengths of a child get lost in the mix.
All right, I have another question from Carolyn, and it's actually two parts. The first is a comment that the specialist who sees her son sees him for only about 10 minutes twice a year and really does not have the time to see or perhaps even document how the disability affects his life, and what is the best way to get this across to his doctor?
Well, I think if you are working with an outside provider, it is their professional responsibility that they do document thoroughly, not only by the initial evaluation, but by any notes they take when they do see your child, how this affects your child academically, potentially, and their functional abilities with this disability. I forgot the second part of the question.
Well, I think you've touched on it. It was the best way to get the message to the doctor and impress upon the doctor that that her son has special needs, and that this doctor seems to be perhaps ignoring them.
Right. Something else I can recommend, that if the doctor is ignoring the child's needs, you may want to do a little research and talk to other parents and see if you can find a different doctor. Doctors, just like anybody, don't always know everything and understand everything about specific disabilities, and sometimes you have to do a little research and find somebody who will be willing to listen to you and work with you and your child.
And Carolyn follows up with, how do these labels carry over into adulthood after age 21? How can they be used advantageously, and how would they apply?
Well, once the child graduates from school, then IDEA is no longer applicable. If they go on to college or a trade school or find a job out of high school, then Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act are both applicable. People probably will not want to look at the IEP because they're pretty extensive, and if they aren't in the educational environment, they won't understand everything about it. But this can help you advocate for your child once they're out of school, and by understanding the other applicable laws, Section 504 and the ADA, you can bring into focus your needs or your child's needs from the IEP and how these laws can be applied.
So Carolyn says thank you, and I'm going to ask you to share sort of a war story, if you will, to put some of the academic information that you've provided into a perspective of a real-life advocacy situation where you were going toe-to-toe, perhaps, with school officials or others who were denying services, denying the appropriate testing, essentially stonewalling the individuals and trying to avoid their responsibilities.
Sure. I can think of a little boy, a little 9-year-old boy who has a seizure disorder and some learning disabilities, and he was doing fine for several years until he reached 5th grade. And that's when his parents saw that he wasn't making progress, that he wasn't keeping up with his peers, and that the school district was doing nothing to address his falling behind and his lagging skills. So I went into the IEP meeting first by introducing myself through written communication. I send a letter to the school district informing them that I am the child's special education advocate, and that there are certain services that we are going to be asking for, and that we would like to have a meeting scheduled within a certain time frame, and we would like notice of who will be at this meeting that we're requesting. After we have the meeting set up, then I go to the meeting, and as with this little boy, initially the school district looked aghast at why I would be there, that they felt that they were providing the appropriate education. But when we sat down and we reviewed the student's records and compared it to the state standards for a 5th grader, and we looked at his report card and saw that everything was positive on the report card, but that he couldn't do 5th grade reading standards and 5th grade math standards and the other academic areas, that he was lagging 2, 3, sometimes 4 years behind, and that his related services at the school, such as from his speech language therapist and his occupational therapist, were not addressing his needs in the classroom, and were not providing the parents with appropriate progress reports. Then we started getting down to the nitty-gritty and addressing where his lagging skills were, why he was behind, what needed to be done to help him catch up to his peers, and recognizing that the goals and objectives needed to be clearly defined to show the progress or regression he was making. And along with that, the objective data collection that I always request to demonstrate to the parents whether he was showing via a graph of that data collection catching up to his peers with the state standards or continuing to fall behind, and what possible additional evaluations he needed to have.
Well, as an aside, I know Stephanie is a fierce advocate, and what's missing from her very pleasant presentation is the powerful personality that she brings to these situations, and the importance of having someone who really understands the rules and what the obligations of the school or other entity that you're dealing with, what those obligations are. Because a parent who goes in without this information can easily be stonewalled, can easily be treated as a person who can be easily pushed around. And this is an indication that getting someone to help you can be very important and usually is not required once you break through with the institution that you're dealing with. Mina adds, I love that you use the state standards as a measure of skill level. So I think we're approaching the end of this webinar, but I want to ask one more time if there are any questions, and if not, we'll thank Stephanie and urge you to get in touch with her if you need her help. And if you are not within the circle where Stephanie can help you, she can point you to others with her skill set who can help you. I see no additional questions, so I'm going to thank Stephanie and thank you all for coming. And I see thank yous showing up in the question spot here, so we'll count that as a round of applause.
Thank you.